Men often struggle with eating disorders and body image disorders. Hi, my name is Dr. Natalie Jones, and I spent several years working with men who have personality disorders such as narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, and borderline personality disorders. One of the things that I don't think is talked about enough is men who have eating disorders and body dysmorphia. We hear it a lot when we talk about women and adolescents, but it's just as common, if not more so, in men, and particularly with men who have psychopathology. And one of the things that men who have narcissism and antisocial personality and even borderline personality disorder struggle with are they definitely have struggles over things such as control, but they also struggle with things such as self-destructive and self-deprecating thoughts, which means that like when their ego is fractured or fragile, they struggle with feeling self-hatred. And a lot of times when they become self-destructive, and if they're not, we're very familiar with people wanting to take out destructive thoughts on other people, such as lashing out, being, gaslighting, being manipulative and things like that. But when they don't have anybody or when they're alone, they often take those things out on themselves. And so a lot of times what can happen is these men engage in self-destructive and self-harming behaviors. And those behaviors can be cutting themselves, burning themselves, punching themselves, and other things like that. But also it could also lead into controlling behaviors around food, and they can vacillate, and often do vacillate, between eating disorders, so that they could have bulimia, they can have anorexia, they can have binge eating disorders. They can also have what we now know as orthorexia, which is where people are hyper focused on being healthy. And so a lot of some of the behaviors that we will see is, it can vacillate between this restrictive eating, binge eating, purging, extreme dieting, and things like that. I also think that men who struggle with this, I think that's why there's such a surge of, I think when we look at like, online dating websites and profiles, right? There's like, you can almost sort of see pathology a little bit, because there's a lot of men that are very hyper focused on being in the gym and working out, and very much obsessed with looking at their bodies and counting calories and appearing to be muscular to attract attention, right? So that's, they love men who attract attention, is also one of the reasons that they can become very obsessed with their bodies. But again, a lot of these men also have had trauma. They also have parents who are pathological, and a lot of times when they're around their pathological parents, they often struggle for control. And so you will also see those eating disordered behaviors show up in people like that. And part of even wooing too, right, would be centered around food. So if I want a woman to look at my body and I want to appear sexually attractive and desirable, I may be trying to be muscular but also be as thin as I can, which is where you see a lot of the purging and eating disordered behavior. And I feel like it's when men sort of engage in this, it's more it's not talked about as much. It's sort of kept on the quieter side. Like when you think about like, because I've also worked at rehabilitation facilities and things like that, where I have worked with people with eating disordered behavior, although it's not my specialty. I've seen a lot of that over the years, and then also in the prison and so on and so forth. And it's not talked about as much because, and one of the reasons is, again, I think, men are supposed to look appealing and supposed to look muscular, but it can be particularly challenging for men who are ethnically not wired to have a good physique. So when I think about like ethnically, so for example, culturally speaking, of course, when I think about ethnicities, you think about African American men who are known for being muscular and fit. Both men and women in African American culture are typically known for having good, strong physiques naturally, meaning that most, generally speaking, don't have to work at it. It just comes naturally. And even with a small amount of work, just sort of, working out and watching diet, they can have really good physiques and appear to look young. Whereas when you look at, white or Eurocentric or even Hispanic, typically speaking, a lot of them don't naturally have that physique that comes so easily. And that's, whenever I did group work or one-on-one work, that would come up a lot in terms of like cultural conversations, like those body types, phenotypically, genotypically, it just doesn't run in the culture like that. And so a lot of people, a lot of men that struggled with that would feel like they have to work extra hard, like they have to go above and beyond, just for the simple fact that that physique doesn't run in their family. And they would essentially kill themselves trying to get that physique. But also, too, emotionally, whenever they would go through something and, they were very rageful and they couldn't necessarily express their emotions outwardly, then they would definitely take it out on their food, and they would be very meticulous about counting calories, weighing their food, and staying at the gym all hours of the day and night. And again, I also think another like thing that was born out of that, men with eating disorders. I honestly think that that's where steroids, the popularity of steroids and what we now know as roid rage comes from, is men who are very obsessed with their body and have body dysmorphia and potentially eating disorders, and they want that extra to get that physique because they're so obsessed with the perfect body. But people who are obsessed, and this includes men and women, people who are often obsessed with getting the perfect body, one of the things that you have to know is that the goalpost is constantly changing. And so even though in their mind they may be thinking, if I could just get here, then I would have the perfect body. Well, when they get to whatever benchmark or whatever, goal that they say that they want to get to, they continue to move the goal internally so that, they never reach the perfect physique and the perfect body. And that's where things can definitely sort of spiral out of control. But a lot of times, even with men, what you'll see is they may vacillate between the different types of eating disorders and things like that. One of the other things that happens with men that I don't really see a lot of people talking about, that I do think lends itself with body dysmorphia, is obsession with penis. And there's a lot of men who are very, very much ego-based, who are obsessed with their penis. When they're obsessed with the girth, they're obsessed with the length, they're obsessed with how long they can keep an erection and how long they can perform with sex and things like that. And it's, again, I don't know what the word would be called for it. I don't think there's such a thing as penis dysmorphia, but it's very much like that. I think that's where things like penis pumps and, pills, that, all this other kind of stuff, these gadgets and things like that, I feel like that's why there's a huge market for things like that. It's based off of that form of dysmorphia around the body.